My friends, hello, news video. There was an accident in the United States. A private jet, a Cessna Citation 550, is an aircraft that found itself in a trap. I'll admit, what happened to it is one of the situations that scares me on this kind of plane. I'll explain this in detail in the video. So, a quick recap of the facts. We have a Cessna 550. It's a twin engine jet, a light private jet. Actually, when I say light, understand that it's not the kind of aircraft that's capable without any trouble. That means without stopping, going from San Francisco to Paris or from San Francisco to Tokyo. You see, but it's an aircraft that's extremely capable of going within the United States from coast to the Caribbean, to Mexico, to Canada, all that and more if needed. He was supposed to take off from Statesville Airport in North Carolina with Florida as his destination. Statesville, North Carolina, it's a small airport, just one runway, oriented 1028, about 2,000 to 2,100 meters long. All right, so it's an uncontrolled airport. That means it has an information service, but there's no air traffic controller, and it has an instrument landing system for the approach. So I'll tell you about it. The plane took off with 7 people on board. It's about a certain Greg Biffle, who is a National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing driver, who is semi-retired, so someone who is also very active in the aviation field. You can see him online with piloting a Robinson-type helicopter. You can see him at the controls of this particular private jet. He's passionate about aviation. And I want to tell you at this point that a lot of National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing pilots have died in private jets in recent years, or aviation accidents in general, especially with planes they owned. I'll also tell you what I think, why this happens, why this often happens to singers, often happens to National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing pilots, to certain surgeons, right? Like, for example, the Bonanza Vittel. It was called the surgeon killer for a reason that I'll describe to you in this video. So he took off, and then immediately after, it seems he needed to return to the airfield. The entire flight will last 7 minutes, and the plane won't climb above 2,000 feet. The weather was pretty terrible, with low visibility and rain. Even though at the moment of the accident, there was no rain on the field, there was rain around, and the visibility was poor with a rather low ceiling. I'll tell you what this means. Look, for example, you take off from Charles de Gaulle Airport with excellent weather. You take off, rotate, retract the landing gear. You have a problem, an engine explodes, you go through some birds, a fire breaks out, you need to come back. What do? You contact the air traffic controller. You tell him something like, Mayday, Mayday, whatever. You explain your situation. He'll tell you to turn around, come back, land on any runway. And at the same time, he takes care of stopping the other traffic. You take a look, you go by feel, you land, 30 seconds later, you've come back and landed. All right, that's the first scenario. I'll give you the second scenario. Second scenario, you take off from Charles de Gaulle Airport, but this time, be careful, you're in the soup right away, which means you take off, you retract the landing gear. You're already in the clouds, you no longer have visual contact with the ground. What do? Do you contact the air traffic controller? Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. You say you need to return to the airfield, and he responds, okay, I'll give you vectors, I have you on radar, turn right, head this way, etc. And so he's going to give you vectors to come back, because you can't see the airfield anymore. You can't really go there on your own. Here's the third scenario to show that the second one is harder. In the first scenario with visual, you could land in about a minute to a minute and 20 seconds. You can see that in the second scenario, it will take you a bit more time, because now we're using vectors to help you get back to the runway. Now, I'll give you the third scenario, which is the most difficult of all. You take off from an airport, you take off from Moore Airport, right? Or from Espy Airport, or from Statesville Airport in North Carolina. There's no air traffic controller or radar service. If you take off, have a problem or bad weather, you have to handle it yourself. What do? All right, that's why I'm telling you I don't like that kind of airport. When the weather is bad, it means that when we take off from an airport, we always have to think about it and keep that in mind. What do I do if I need to come back right away? And some airports, in the end, because there isn't, if you look at the aviation, you don't really have takeoff minimums. You can take off with almost no visibility. As long as you see the runway and reach your acceleration line, you're good to go. That doesn't mean you have the landing minimums at that moment. So you can potentially take off. For example, imagine you have a category 1 instrument landing system, and then you take off, you have a ceiling that's at 100 feet. Sometimes it goes even lower than that. Okay, you have visibility below the cloud layer, you accelerate, you take off, you pull back on the stick. Positive rate, you're already in the cloud. Okay, you don't have the minimums to come back and land. You see what I mean? And so that can create a tricky situation if you have an emergency right away. You may need to go to another airport if this problem occurs. But what do you do if the airport you took off from, well, there you go. It's not controlled. So you don't even have immediate contact with an air traffic controller who can give you a hand. So what happened? When we look at the radar track, we see the plane took off and maintained at 2,000 feet. We can imagine that maybe he wanted to stay out of the clouds, although I think he was well inside them, because the available meters at the moment show very low clouds. A completely overcast sky at 500 feet. There were clouds, drizzle, and all that. So at 2,000 feet, he was already in it and had to look for the airport and come back to land on it. So you see the complexity of the task. So what happened is that on the way back, at that point, we still don't have any surveillance cameras or car cameras or door or doorbell cameras or anything else showing the plane arriving. What we have is the impact. That is a few seconds after the impact when the plane has already turned into a fireball. What we know for sure is that on the way back, he wasn't able to maintain his altitude. That means the pilots were probably being piloted by Mr. Biffle himself and maybe by another pilot who was there. So there was another pilot who was also there. So were both of them flying? That's something the investigation will reveal. Was it the owner, so the National Association for Stock Car Auto Racing driver, Mr. Greg Biffle, who was flying himself, or was he just assisting? There's a picture showing him sitting on the right side in the cockpit of this plane. By the way, it's a plane that's certified for a single pilot. It's not forbidden to fly it with two people, to have a captain and a co-pilot, but it's completely possible to fly it alone. And many owners fly it alone, or sometimes when they feel they need help, they can bring a co-pilot. So we don't know what the arrangement was that day, but we know there was another pilot in the plane. So we'll see later who was actually flying. In any case, what we know is that the plane managed to make a big loop at low altitude and came back to land. This loop lasted about 7 minutes, which is an excessively slow time, really, but it's explained by the weather I described to you. So what happens is that it hits the trees. At some point, there's a video showing trees knocked down. It hits the fence around the airport. At that moment, we see the aircraft is in distress. We're no longer dealing with a plane that's able to stay in the air. We're dealing with a plane that's going down to the ground. And the pilot can't even increase his glide. He can't even control his flight. He tried to skim over the trees, the fence, and reach the runway, which is big, right there in front of him. So probably time was up. Maybe if those people had 30 more seconds or even 15 more seconds, they would be alive. Unfortunately, this reasoning applies to many accidents. If we had 15 more seconds, yes, but usually we don't. So what happens is that the plane hits the runway and turns into a fireball. And then unfortunately, the 7 people who were on board were killed. So we're talking about Greg Biffle, his wife, 2 of his children. That makes 4 plus 3 other people, including the pilot I mentioned, the pilot's son, and another person whose identity hasn't been revealed. At the time I'm recording this, what happened is that 7 people were killed in this accident. The National Transportation Safety Board is here now. Moving on. Why? A lot of people from racing, golf, music, all that end up in this kind of accident. First, there's already a statistical bias. That means when a private jet crashes, you're not going to find a working class person inside. Let's be fair. When a private jet crashes, you're always going to find high profile individuals, obviously, because only that kind of person can afford this type of transportation. So necessarily, you have to keep that in mind. Now, the other side is that we can't do, I always say this in my videos, you shouldn't try to compete with the airlines. Why? Because the airline, when it has, for example, an Airbus A320 a plane, it's not the plane that makes the company. It's all the technical and human logistics around it. When you have a plane that's going to take off from North Carolina and go to Florida, well, around that plane, you potentially have 1,000 years of experience. You don't just have the pilots in their cockpit, you also have the ground staff, you have the mechanics, you have the dispatchers, you have the people who handle the loading, the people who handle the fuel. You have a lot of people involved. And this flight is organized by these professionals in a collaborative way. So actually, you have a lot of experience that's put in place. When you buy a private jet or a high performance plane to use for traveling, well, you have a problem, which is that you're under operational pressure because you have to leave, have an appointment this afternoon or a wedding to attend the next day, and so on. So you have operational pressure, you have to go, but at the same time, you don't have the professionals around you, you don't have the logistics that allow you to organize this flight despite the pressure. Or to say, I won't do it just because we have a logo isn't true. When you own your own plane, you don't have those safeguards, you don't have that help, you don't have any of that. And so the risk precisely is to crash. I'll just give you an example of someone who told me about an accident he survived as a child. He survived with lifelong after effects. He had a lot of fractures and all that while he was with his father. And then in a single engine plane, and the weather was starting to get worse. They were on the ground when the weather got worse. They were with friends. There were 4 of them in total. And actually, they had to leave because, quite simply, if they didn't leave, they would have to arrange a hotel. So you see what I mean? An airline can easily arrange a hotel or send passengers away, and it can also cancel a flight with an Airbus A380. They tell you, sorry, we're not leaving, and you're going to have to talk to the customer service people. They can yell at you or tell you to wait or call security or something else. You see what I mean? The pilots are totally disconnected from it, like the A380 pilot who says, well, it's a no-go. He exfiltrates, reaches the stairs, turns right, gets in a car, and leaves. You won't be able to talk to him, okay? So he can do that without any operational pressure. He doesn't care about you. It's the company that will pay or give out vouchers for drinks or figure out how to find another plane. But when you're the pilot, you're the organizer, you're the decision maker. I mean, you're wearing too many hats at the same time. So what's going to happen? The sky is telling me the day was coming to an end. I don't know what was in that town. There was no hotel, nothing like that. So there was some pressure. They said to themselves, let's go anyway. I'm leaving because if I don't, we'll be homeless tonight. So he takes off. The weather catches up with them and then it's going to pin the plane down. So they were trying to cross a kind of mountain range. And then what happens is that there are downdrafts that grab the plane like a big hand and slam it against the forest. The plane crashed with fatalities and he barely survived. But there you go, operational pressure, because I can't organize everything. That's why quite regularly you'll see that these plane owners end up in that situation. So honestly, if one day you have a plane, a jet, a private jet, please take the airlines, buy a plane ticket with a regular airline under Part 121. You see, you're at ease. It's true that customer service isn't what it used to be. If you can afford a private jet, you can also afford business or first class. You'll have a terminal just for you. You'll have a lounge. You'll have a chauffeur and all that and all that. It might cost you as much or even less than a private jet, but at the same time, you'll stay whole. There you go, my friends. Thank you for watching this video until now. And thank you to those who support this channel by subscribing. The board behind me is from a video I made for subscribers earlier. Look, it's on the page for those on this site, or it's in the link I give you below. This video is fascinating. A controlled flight into terrain in the far north. That's why you see the runway behind me is runway 35T, which means 35 true. Very interesting video. And of course, there are plenty more in preparation. Thanks, friends. See you in a future videos.